The stifling July heat in Philadelphia was not merely the result of the summer sun beating against the closed windows of the State House. It was the weight of a decision that was about to tear the map of the known world asunder. 56 men, swathed in wool coats and drenched in sweat, knew that by signing that piece of parchment, they were not just drafting a document, they were sealing their own death warrants for high treason. Outside the British Empire, the greatest military force the earth had ever seen, watched the colonies like a stern father watches a rebellious son, ready to crush any spark of insubordination with the steel of bayonets and the fire of cannons. The silence in the room was broken only by the scratching of quill pens and the racing pulses of hearts that dared to dream of something that seemed impossible: absolute liberty. What happened in those days of 1776 was not just a political revolt, but the birth of a new idea of humanity, a dangerous experiment that would change the course of history forever. If you feel that history is a living organism that still breathes among us, join us on this journey and subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter of the great turning points that shaped our world. To understand the 4th of July, we must smell the gunpowder and salty tea that hung over the Boston docks years prior. America did not wake up one day deciding to be free. She was pushed toward the abyss by the stubbornness of a crown that saw its subjects across the Atlantic merely as revenue sources to pay for European wars. Imagine the cobblestone streets, the sound of horse hooves and the constant murmur of men in dimly lit taverns where discontent simmered like strong ale. The Stamp Act, the tea tax, the coercive acts, every new measure from London was another nail in the coffin of colonial loyalty. The American colonist, who once took pride in being British, began to feel like a stranger in his own land, a second-class citizen ruled by a king who had never set foot on American soil and a parliament where they had no voice. This built-up tension exploded in street massacres and the dumping of entire shipments of tea into the icy waters of the harbour, an act of defiance that echoed like thunder in London. War had already begun in the fields of Lexington and Concord, where the blood of farmers turned militiamen stained the green spring grass. The smell of musket smoke was still fresh when the Second Continental Congress convened. There was no unanimity. There was fear, doubt, and heated debates that lasted late into the night. Some delegates still believed in reconciliation, sending desperate petitions to King George III, hoping he would see reason. But the monarch's response was short and brutal. He declared the colonies to be in a state of open rebellion. At that moment, the bridge to the past was burned. Thomas Paine, with his pamphlet Common Sense, gave words to the feelings many could not express, arguing that it was absurd for a continent to be governed by an island. The logic of monarchy was being challenged by the light of reason and the force of necessity. Thomas Jefferson, a young Virginian with a brilliant mind and a sharp pen, was tasked with putting the reasons for that separation on paper. Imagine him in his rented room, wrestling with words by candlelight, trying to articulate not just a political grievance, but a philosophy of existence. He wrote of self-evident truths, of the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words, which sound familiar today, were explosive at the time. They challenged the notion that power came from God to the king. Jefferson asserted that power came from the people, and that if a government became destructive, it was the people's right and duty to overthrow it. While he wrote, the British fleet, a forest of masts and white sails, was anchoring in New York Harbor, ready to unleash thousands of professional soldiers, German mercenaries, and the terror of total war upon the colonies. July 4th, 1776 was not the day the war ended, but the day the cause gained a soul. When the document was finally approved, there were no immediate fireworks or global celebrations. There was a solemn recognition that the road ahead would be paved with sacrifice. Benjamin Franklin, with his biting wit and pragmatism, summed up the situation by saying they all needed to hang together, or they would most assuredly hang separately. The signing of the Declaration of Independence was an act of collective courage. Wealthy men with everything to lose and humble men seeking a better future joined their fates in a risky gamble against the greatest power on the planet. They were trading the security of servitude for the dangerous uncertainty of freedom. The years that followed tested the fiber of this new nation to the limit. We see Washington's army, ragged, starving and leaving bloody footprints in the snow at Valley Forge. We see the pain of divided families, where brother fought against brother, and the anguish of a civilian population that saw their homes burned and their crops confiscated. Liberty had a price, and it was paid in human lives, in winters of despair, and in battles that seemed lost before they even began. Yet something had shifted in the mind of the American soldier. He was no longer fighting just for a piece of land or a tax break. He was fighting for an idea, for a piece of paper that said he was the master of his own destiny. French support, won through Franklin's shrewd diplomacy, brought the fleet and resources needed to tip the scales. But it was the resilience of the American spirit that kept the flame alive in the darkest moments. The final victory at Yorktown, where General Cornwallis was forced to surrender his army, while the band played a tune appropriately called "The World Turned Upside Down," marked the end of British rule. But it was only the beginning of the true challenge. Creating a nation from 13 independent colonies, each with its own interests, prejudices, and worldviews, was a task as monumental as the war itself. Slavery, a painful and hypocritical contradiction at the heart of a document that spoke of equality, remained an open wound that would take nearly a century and a bloody civil war to confront. Independence was not a final destination, but a starting point for an eternal debate over what it means to be free. The legacy of July 4, 1776, transcends the borders of the United States. It was the first domino to fall in a sequence that would inspire the French Revolution, the independence movements in Latin America, and countless liberation struggles across the globe. It set the precedent that authority must be based on consent, not birthright or brute force. Today, when we look at the world's democracies, we see the echoes of those quill pens scratching the parchment in Philadelphia. The ambition of those men, with all their flaws and virtues, created a model of self-governance that, despite its imperfections, continues to be the aspiration of millions. To reflect on independence is to look into the mirror of human nature. It is to see fear transformed into courage, oppression into opportunity, and discord into an imperfect but lasting union. History is not made of static marble, but of pulsing decisions made by flesh and blood people who decided that the future did not have to be a repetition of the past. If you believe that knowing our history is the best tool to understand the present and build a better future, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow our next explorations through the eras that defined who we are today. The quest for liberty is a journey that never ends, and each generation is called upon to sign in its own way its own declaration of commitment to the future.